Welcome to a gathering of friends, those of you who are watching on YouTube or otherwise, Facebook. We're going to listen to Ray Vander this morning and have a discussion about it. So let's join in that teaching now.
Approach. I'm never going to get finished. They told me I had to quit at 4, but they didn't say AM or PM. One more number. When Jesus was teaching, the rabbis who were primarily in Galilee, more rabbinic stuff comes out of Galilee than anywhere else. We'll study that later. This northwest corner, they had nicknamed the Land of the 12 because the people who lived there were the Orthodox Jews, God-fearing men and women, Pharisees, the most godly people you will ever meet in the whole world. Bear with me and I'll show you why I say that later. They call it the Land of the 12. Why? This is where God's faithful people live. Not proud or pompous, but this is where God's people try and live. The Land of the 12 tribes of Israel. On the east lived the pagans in an area called the Decapolis. Now, in spite of the fact it doesn't appear that they should use a 7 for the pagan, you can ask me later about that if you're interested, the rabbis called that place the Land of the 7. The 7 wicked pagan nations, they called them. So Land of the 7, the wicked pagans. Land of the 12, God-fearing Jews. Twice, Jesus fed big groups of people. 5,000 near Capernaum, Land of the 12. 4,000 just south of Bethsaida, Land of the 7. When he fed 5,000, how many baskets of leftovers? When he fed the 4,000, how many baskets of leftovers? So Jesus says, I am the bread of the world for 12 tribes of Israel, and I am the bread of the world for... And Westerners say, oh, come on. That's how an Easterner talks and thinks. It's the experience, not the data. And again, I get people all worked up who say, well, then, the only way you can read the Bible is to have somebody in your church who can explain the culture. Yes! Why do you think Jesus said, go to the Jew first and then to the Greek? You think he meant like Greeks, go to the Jew. If every one of them in the whole world doesn't immediately believe, spit on them and go to the Goy, the Gentile. Or did Jesus mean every single time you begin to build a community of faith, you've got to have some Jews there, because if you don't, who's going to tell you this stuff? And by what we did to our Jewish brothers and sisters in history has devastated our ability not to get the text right. I happen to believe our theology is good and right, but to see the depth of the text. I have to put my numbers here. Oops. All right, let's look at a couple of others besides the An Easterner, with their concrete stuff, wants to deal with relationship. How do you experience God? The Westerner, with our need for information, wants to know about God. I made my commitment to Jesus when I was 16 years old. On my way home, I'm in my car. I'm stopped at a train crossing in Michigan. There's a train going back and forth. I'm thinking to myself, the devil would have given the same answer to those questions that I did tonight. What do you have to know to be saved? What are the sacraments? What is true faith? It's all about information. The devil knows this stuff better than you do. He was there. The question is, do you know God? So the Jew says, the Greek says, God is omnipotent. Now I know something about him. Tell me when is the last time you had a deep personal experience with omnipotent? And I want to know what you were, never mind. Okay? The Easterner says, Abba, Daddy. Wait till the next time you're in Israel and some little kid gets lost in the airport and is going, Abba, Abba. And then he sees or she sees Abba and runs and Abba. You'll be face to face with God himself, because he said, call me Abba. Don't call me omnipotent. Call me Abba. I'm your daddy. Now, if you want to know I'm omnipotent, wonderful. Find the proof texts. But know me first, then know about me. The Easterner, faith is how you live. The Hebrew word is emunah. Paul writes, the just shall live by faith. He takes that from Habakkuk. And Habakkuk says, the just shall live by emunah, faithfulness. So Paul actually ends up saying exactly the opposite what Christians have done. Paul ends up saying, the just will live by faithfulness, obedience. And we say, no, the just will live by believing because obedience is no longer necessary. To a Westerner, if you want to judge, and I'm being really critical here, I love my tradition. God has given me enormous things through my Western seminary education. I'm not honestly against it. I bless God for what he's taught you. I want you to see how radically different the way Easterners think. If you want to know a given Bible study or sermon, is it East or West? At the end of a Western sermon, the question is, do you agree with this? Do you believe this? At the end of an Eastern sermon, always, what must I do? Because it's not about what you know. It's about who you are. I think I put that up here too. I'm way ahead of my... Oh, that's another thing I didn't think about. Well, I thought about it because I put it here, but I haven't thought in a while. A Greek says, who am I? You been on one of those pilgrimages trying to figure out who you are? It's like an onion, you know, you peel all these layers to see who you really are, and then you get to the middle, there aren't any layers anymore, and it's gone. It's like, who am I? Well, I was the onion. Greeks always want to know, who am I? And if I remember right, being at your point in life, that was big for me. Who really am I? Who am I? Life has to have meaning. What's the meaning of life? I'm going to figure it out someday. Those are good things. Let me show you how an Easterner thinks. An Easterner says, what should I do? Not who am I? Who you are is determined by what you do. So get out there and do. Then you'll know who you are. Don't sit and think, who am I? This is an Easterner. And life doesn't have meaning. Life has purpose. Not what's the meaning of life, what's the purpose of life? Because meaning finds its place to an Easterner in purpose. Here's a big one. When the Easterner versus Westerner, when the Easterner is asked a question, he or she prefers to tell you a story. Because the story allows you to enter the experience. Let me show you. There are about 3,500 parables, by the way, that you could get a hold of and read from Jesus' time. As far as I can tell, only 3 are completely original to Jesus. What Jesus did was to borrow well-known Aesop's fables, not really, but parables that everybody knew, and to use them sometimes in new ways, sometimes not, but he often changes one key detail. Let me show you one example. This one moves me very deeply because of some personal stuff in my own past. You know the parable of the prodigal son? From a Western point of view, anybody got guts here? What would you say the prodigal's sin was? If you had to summarize in 5 words, what's his sin? What did he do wrong? Okay, one at a time. Abandoned his father. Disobeyed his father. Squandering money. Living sexually immoral life. He said, I want you dead. Acted he like you want. Okay, those are all true. You know what the Jew would say? What's his sin? The Jew would say the sin of the prodigal is that he thought he could live by himself without his community. If you live without a community, life is going to destroy you. You can't do it alone. He sinned the moment he said, Dad, I'm not leaving the faith. We all think he's leaving the faith. He didn't say, I'm going to go live in Las Vegas and live immorally. He said, Dad, I'm going out there, and guess what? I don't need the community anymore. I can do it myself. Anyway, somebody came to Jesus and asked him a question about God. And Jesus told a well-known parable. The Jewish version of the parable goes like this. A kid commits a terrible sin and thinks he can make it on his own. So he says, Dad, give me my share of the inheritance. And he goes off and lives riotously. After feeding pigs, which he hit bottom, especially in a Jewish context, after feeding pigs, he thinks to himself, there's a rabbinic law interpreting the passage, obey your parents, which says if you break community, for the sake of community, you can't go back as a community member, but you can come back as a slave or a servant. So the kid thinks, I'd rather be a slave in my community than a free person where I can't live for God. So he comes home. Now, in the Jewish parable, as he approaches his home, he meets his father. Accidentally, it doesn't say that, but that's the implication. He says to his father, I've sinned against you and against... See, you're Western. That's okay. What would have been in the Jewish mind is Yahweh, but no Jew would ever say Yahweh. Jesus is never once in his entire life ever recorded as saying God's name. He would not have said it. It's too sacred. So you use a synonym. The number one synonym for God or for Yahweh is heaven. I've sinned against you and against heaven. What is heaven? Yahweh. I can't come back as your son. Let me come back as your slave. The father began to cry. Said, son, when you left, you broke community. For the sake of community, you can never come home. And he closed the door. And the family gathered around the weeping old man, consoling him and encouraging him for having done the righteous thing. Now here you are, Be Jesus listeners. And somebody asked a question about what's God like? And Jesus said, and there was a young man who went to his dad and said, give me the inheritance. I can do it on my own. What are you thinking? You know the story. You know what's coming. Now what's going to be interesting is how does this rabbi use the story? Because all rabbis use the same stories. And Jesus said the kid woke up one morning and said, I can't do it alone. Look what I'm doing. I'm feeding pigs, for God's sake. I can go home and be my dad's slave. So he goes home. Are you with me? Are you tracking? Now, come back to Jesus. And every day, the father went down the street looking for his son. And one day, in the distance, he saw him coming. And he ran to meet him. And he threw his arms around him and wept. And his son said, Dad, I've sinned against you and against heaven. I cannot come home as your son. Let me come back as your slave. And the dad says in plain English, shut up. You're my son. I love you. Come home with me. And Jesus is looking at his audience and they're all going, whoa. And now Jesus wants to make a point. He is a master. So he adds a PS. And the older brother came and said, Dad, what are you doing? And Dad said, he's my son. I love him. Welcome him home. Now, the rabbis call what I just did Shanan. Ask me about it later. Now, every rabbi I've ever seen, my mentors, and I see Jesus in those same eyes. At that point, your eyes light with fire because you've got your audience hooked. You're feeling the power of a father who would go looking for his son and welcome him back under any and all conditions. And now the rabbi, this is going to come out of his soul. And that's what God is like. To make to the body of Jesus. I want you to see that the biblical people are here. And if you could learn to see the text through their eyes, you will see God face to face just in the experience of hearing the text. And if you can't weep a tear, in your heart at least, for a God who will take you back under any and all conditions because he loves you so deeply. Either I've been a poor rabbi, which is very possible, or you really don't know who God is. How many deep theological questions does Jesus answer by telling you a story and then say, now you figure it out? It would be great knowing who you are, and I'll keep complimenting you until I get to know you. Knowing who you are to find out how many faces that parable would have in this classroom. Because there are some of you who are the older brother who would exclude certain people from community for the sake of community. And in the process, you discover you don't have community either. Maybe we'd all tend in that direction. There are others of you who are going to say, I'm the son. And I haven't dared to go home because my community won't take me back. If the Father takes you back, community would take it back. Anyway, you get my point. First name? Mike A.L. Very good.
And I've heard one of your lectures.
Well, that's again, a perspective I haven't heard before. I think most of us would say we understand that story, the story of the prodigal son is about God's love. I've heard that taught and preached, but to hear the perspective of the original listener who understood it to be so contrasting to the typical story that probably they'd heard before, and the impact that would have on them to understand that God's love overcomes the worst of sin, breaking community, and yet here's God welcoming back his son, and then the brother who objects to that because it is not righteous. It is not what he considered to be the right thing. Um, and yet God is that way. No matter what, the worst sin that you could commit, God still loves, still is ready, still watching, still wanting you back. That never changes, never will change. Paul says in Romans 8, maybe my favorite chapter in the Bible, that what can separate us from the love of God? Nothing can separate it. Nothing in all creation, high or low, far and wide, nothing can separate us from the love of God. Folks, if we could get an inkling of that, the how profound that is, how life changing that is, how history changing that was and is, we would be rocked beyond recognition, and we would rock the world. So let's not settle. Let's determine, guys and gals, that we won't settle anymore for what we think is normal, what we think is the thing to do. Let's be ready to have God just shake us to the core. I want that. I want that for you. I want it for me. That's the hope
Yeah, I
for
thought it
the
was.
world.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Bryant. Oh.
I was gonna say I thought it was kind of interesting that a couple weeks ago he was talking about how he doesn't wear a cross because it's a method of execution and he didn't want to offend a Jewish person.
Mm-hmm.
But today he would repeatedly say the name of God, which was like sacred above sacred.
Yeah.
And I would think that would be more offensive to a Jewish person, because while a cross might be an execution method to a Jewish person, it's not like integral to their faith. So I don't know. I just thought it was kind of strange that in one case he was worried about offending somebody, and on the other case he seemed kind of willy-nilly about what he was saying.
Yeah.
Like to us, we don't treat it the same way, but I thought it was weird.
I wonder if, and I don't know this, but I wonder if when he's around, and I think there's probably a difference between an Orthodox Jew and non-Orthodox, who would be, one would be offended, one would not be. again, I don't know, but, and maybe he uses different language depending on his audience. Is that hypocritical? You know, you could make a case for that, but certainly Paul says, I preach in the using the methods and techniques and words of my audience. I need to teach them, and then when I'm in a Greek setting, I teach in Greek, and when I'm not, I teach otherwise. So uh, who knows? It was interesting though. I remember the early Christians did not use the cross as a symbol. That only came in vogue much later down in the centuries or more recent history. Did the cross become a symbol of Christianity? That to them it was, even the early Christians, it was a horrible uh, thing. Nobody drew a cross on anything or wore a cross. Um, that was not, history changes our thinking and ideas about stuff. And today we don't think much about it, but once upon a time that would have been silly to say I'm a Christian and be wearing a cross around your neck. Anyway, not not a big deal, but just something I remember. Anybody else have any thoughts on what we heard today? Well, friends, let's let me pray with us. Benediction is an ending prayer, and that means to send us out to be, like we heard at the very beginning of this. What are we going to do now? Not do you agree, not do you understand, but what are you going to do? And so as we go, let's think about that, and let me pray a scripture uh, that might encourage us. So I pray for us. This is from Colossians 1. I ask that we may be filled with the knowledge of God's will in all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so as to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to Him, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God. Just like we heard from Ray Vander today, it's not just are we smarter, but what are we going to do? Will it bear fruit? So I pray that will be the case for us today. What we heard today will bear fruit in us and in our world, in those around us. So love you guys again. Glad to see you all today. Invite somebody next week. Invite a friend to join us next week, and hopefully soon we'll be able to get back together face to face. I'm hopeful that we can. Anybody have anything, final words before we go?
It's a quiet group this morning, isn't it?
Yeah. Some days it is. We're all tired from partying
Yeah.
yesterday, 4th of July weekend. So
Yeah.
anyway, love you guys.
Thanks. Appreciate y'all.
See you soon. Be blessed. Be blessed. Please. In Jesus'
Right.
name.
It's always good to see Penny's name there.
Yeah.
We can at least see Dakota and Bryant on the picture.
Yeah. She doesn't have her hair.
Right.
They don't have the hair combed yet, I guess. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.